So this is more of an impromptu video I wanted to make about a niche subject. So I don't have a script this time around. I'm not gonna edit out all the usual things like squeaking chairs and birds singing outside or cars going by. So you're gonna have to deal with that. But I figured it's more of a niche subject. As said, it's more of a reference video for me to be able to explain certain things about healing, because I've noticed ever since Arcanist went live that people seem to think that shields and healing are the same when they aren't. Like shields and heals can both be very useful, don't get me wrong, but I've noticed that people, for example, think that Arcanists make for the best healers or Dragon Knights make for great healers now, because they have certain shielding abilities that make them stand out in the logs. Part of why this is happening is because of the way that shields are represented in logs. And logs can be great. Logs contain a lot of information, and if you know how to read logs, then you can get a pretty good idea of how a certain battle went without necessarily having been there, but you do have to know how to read them. And I feel with shields that not enough people realize just how shields work and why they seem so amazing in logs. When you actually look back at footage from those same fights, those shields do not usually have as big an impact as the logs suggest, most of the time anyway. So I have a log here. I've anonymized it because there's a bunch of people in there who I haven't asked if it's okay to share this. Just this Arcanist here, that's me. This Nightblade here, that's my friend Lori. And there's this thing in logs where people who aren't very experienced reading them just look at, big number good. So they look at the biggest number, and based on that, you would say, "Oh wow, I totally showed that Nightblade how good Arcanist is, because I did so much more HPS healing per second than he did across an entire run." Then we go to the actual breakdown, or not the actual breakdown, but a more specific look at the healing, and you'll see this kind of transparent part of the bar. That's all shields. So if you look at raw healing, just the solid green bar is my actual healing on Arcanist, and you can see that for the Nightblade it's quite a bit bigger than my raw healing. So why is this relevant? Because you can say, okay, some are heals, some are shields, but numbers add up, right? For that, we have to take a look at the actual breakdown of all my skills. So this is a breakdown of my skills that I use across the evening. Don't try to make a healing build based on this. I just slapped some crap together. This might not really be an optimized Arcanist healing build, but that's not the point at the moment. You can see just which skills are responsible for that huge shielding contribution towards my overall healing. Gibbering Shelter, the Arcanist shield, and a little bit of Chakram of Destiny, which I threw in just for funsies, but it ended up doing 1.7 million healing anyway, or, well, according to the logs it did. So if you look at those shield abilities, you might notice that they all have pretty low overheal. 23% is actually still pretty high. I don't really know how the dual Gibbering Shelter works in the logs. Someone else can figure that one out. 40% is also still pretty high for Chakram of Destiny. If you use Barrier, for example, usually when I run Barrier on a healer, overheal can be 5%, maybe 10%. But if you look at the overheal of my regular skills, it's all like above 80 or around 80, like 72. It's also actually shielding ability. Like all the low ones are shielding abilities. So what does this mean? Well, if we go back to the overall listing of like the healing done. Actually, let me grab this one real quick. What you'll see is that it gives HPS, so healing per second across the entire run. This number, well, it is true that the higher it is, the better usually, but this number is based exclusively on actual heals, not as overheals. You might actually notice a difference when you look at a tooltip of a support set. It will like say if you heal an ally or if you overheal an ally. Those are actually different according to the game and according to the logs. So an actual heal would be, say a friend has 60% health left, I heal them and they go back up to 90. That's an actual heal. Overheal would be if my friend is already at 100% and I cast a burst heal on them, that's all overheal. So that will not go into this number. That will not figure into my overall healing. Otherwise, every healer would have like 20k HPS every one, and that's useless information because the timing of your heals is kind of important. This works this way for regular heals, but for shields it's a bit different. As we see here, you can see that the overheal is quite a bit lower. The reason this happens is because if you cast a regular heal on someone who is at 100% health, okay, you mistimed it, or maybe you're trying to buff them or whatever, or you're just trying to heal one ally and there's like 3 other people in the radius that are all at 100%, and that all goes into your overheal percentage. So like having 80 here, that's quite normal. Like at least I have that pretty much every run, so I hope it's quite normal. So that's how it works with normal heals. So at the moment itself, it's decided whether it goes into your healing pool and counts towards your HPS, or it goes into overheal and it doesn't count towards your overall HPS. Like it doesn't make the number bigger. With a shield, shields usually last for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. I think barrier is 20 seconds. I will actually have to check that. So what happens, for example, if you mistime a barrier, say that you cast a barrier and you're not really under pressure, it's not really needed, or you're double barriered or whatever. You would think, oh, that goes into overheal, right? Because it's mistimed. No, because it's actually lasting a bit. So let's say 20 seconds for the sake of argument. In those 20 seconds, a lot of things can happen that will eat up that barrier without it actually being that significant in the grand scheme of things. So you may walk into some AoE from an NPC, or you might step into siege fire, or you might be light attacked by some bow ganker or whatever. Like all things that would normally be fixed with like 1 tick from Echoing Vigor will now eat away at your barrier. And if it happens a couple of times, to actually use up your entire barrier. All of that, all of those little bites into your shield, they all go into your healing number in the logs. If you mistime a barrier, it might actually 0% might still go into overheal. So all that might go into your actual healing. And the difficulty is that in the logs, you cannot tell the difference between a barrier like that and a barrier that saves the entire team. Don't get me wrong, like a well-timed barrier is as valuable as a well-timed Soul Siphon. Soul Siphon is the Nightblade healing ultimate, very good one. It shows up a bit funky in logs usually because like the number of casts never correct in my experience, but you can still see it has like over 3 million healing, actually more than the burst heal, than Blessing of Restoration in this case. And I've even seen Soul Siphon be like the top heal. But if you look at the overheal percentage, it's like 82%. So if you cast Soul Siphon, it can save the entire team. But if there's already like a few people at 100% health, like it won't it won't affect them in terms of the healing. Like that extra healing to those already at 100%, that will not count towards the HPS number in the logs. A barrier, a poorly timed barrier, will go into that. So that's why with barriers and with other shielding abilities as well, they take priority over other heals in the logs, because also you have to realize that if someone uses a poorly timed barrier, until that barrier either dissipates or is eaten up, the other healers cannot quote-unquote farm HPS on you, because if they have like their vigors up, their radiating generation up, all of those ticks will go into overheal until the shield is gone. So the shield actually takes priority in the logs. Like the shield will have to go into the healing number fully before the other healers get HPS again through their regular heals. So that's why you get like this weird kind of discrepancy between people who use a lot of shields and people who use raw heals. And that's why, for example, if you're using an ultimate, not an ultimate, if you're using a set like Combat Physician, like a shield set, that will pretty much guarantee that healer to get top, quote-unquote, top healer in the logs. Because if someone is using Combat Physician in your group, they will be casting like tiny little shields throughout the entire run. So suppose that this player would have been wearing Combat Physician, they would have like an extra 5 million just from those little shields. Now, there's a reason why Combat Physician is not one of the top support sets or the top support set in a group. Normally you will want to run Spell Power Cure, Powerful Assault, Rallying Cry, Transmutation, those kind of sets, and not Combat Physician, because the actual impact of Combat Physician in a group is not that noticeable. Like, I've been in instances where people didn't even notice that someone was running the set until they saw the logs after, and they were somehow the top healer because of the way that shields work in logs. So the point is to take those shields with a grain of salt when you're comparing healing performances. So just to get back to this screen, like, yeah, if you have a raid leader who only looks at big numbers, like they will say, oh wow, Dagonite the Arcanist really showed Glory the Nightblade, who's great at healing. But if you look at the actual breakdown in the numbers and how they work, it's not actually comparable. Like Nightblade is a far superior healing class to Arcanist, and that kind of makes it difficult sometimes to compare healing classes to each other, because in my previous video I claimed that Sorcerer is the best healer, and it's kind of closely followed by Nightblade. I still stand by that, but the way I get to that conclusion is that normally I will go into a screen like this and just compare healing classes and performances, and I kind of know when I use a different class, like what kind of numbers I would have done. So that's the way you can compare healing classes to each other, by just comparing your own performances. And usually the way I do it is I just don't take ultimates into account, because with ultimates it gets kind of difficult, because when I'm on a sorcerer, I can cast quite a lot of barriers, and those will be great in the logs, but they won't be necessarily represented well if I mistimed all of them. At the same time, you can't say, oh, let's just discount all shielding abilities then, because like I said, a good barrier, a well-timed barrier is as valuable as a well-timed Soul Siphon or Templar ulti or whatever. So you can't get rid of one ultimate and then just take the others into account and then make your conclusions. So I usually just compare the heals without ultimates taken into account, because any class can run a barrier, so any class can have a very good ultimate. And when you compare those numbers, Sorcerer is just superior to the other classes. Nightblade still comes kind of close, but without Soul Siphon, I don't think they can. Like if the skills are equally matched between players, like there's no contest. The only exception is when there's like Templars, because Templars have Ritual of Rebirth, like the clappy heal. And if you're like in a huge, not very organized group, like I was in one of such groups like a month ago, and on my Sork I almost got out healed by the Templar, because the Templar doesn't have to aim their heals. They can just like spam that button infinitely and the heals go to whoever needs it, and that way you can again farm HP, as weird as it sounds. So yeah, I might actually do a separate video on how to read logs as a healer, because if you are trying to evaluate your performance based on just the logs and you don't really know about this, it can be very disheartening when you get like dunked on by people running all kinds of weird shielding abilities that take priority, but might not actually have that big an impact, because again, like this would suggest that I was the most valuable healer of this particular night, whereas in reality I remember this raid quite well. I've even included some of the clips from it in one of my compilations where I play as the Arcanist. That's all from this run. And I also remember that you know, when Lori the Nightblade died, we would be in serious trouble, whereas if I died, it all might not be lost, you know. So you can kind of judge the value based on that kind of experience. Like, okay, what kind of impact do I actually have on the group? Like if I die prematurely, is it a group wipe, or does just overhealing go down significantly? How does it affect group survivability? Those are the kind of things you have to look at, and you can't do that just through logs, especially when you use like shield-based classes or builds such as this. But in the end, it should always be a combination of logs on one hand and then actual footage or actual experience on the other hand, because, you know, I was pretty surprised when I saw these logs, because I just knew by the way we were playing that this was not an accurate representation of what was going on. So yeah, I just wanted to share this with you in case people try to tell you that, yeah, no, actually, if you just use Combat Physician on an Arcanist, you'll be the best healer of all time. It's you'll have the best logs of all time. That's for damn sure. But if you were to play a Sorcerer or Nightblade instead with actually valuable support sets, like vital support sets, the overall group performance would actually be a lot better. Because, like I said, with Combat Physician, you just kind of farm small increments of pretend HPS throughout the run. It kind of works the same when you look at damage done. Like, it's not here, but for example, if on a DK you are running Flames of Oblivion, it does kind of the same thing, where it just does small amounts of DPS across the run, but it's not actual burst damage, so it doesn't really do anything apart from giving you a large amount of DPS, which, you know, leads some players to conclude that DKs in a group setting are better than Wardens, which is, trust me, definitely not the case. Like, DKs are valuable, but more in the support category of things. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share for now. As I said, it's impromptu, it's unscripted, it's kind of a reference video for me to explain this in case people have questions, because I've had to explain this a few times, like, okay, but why isn't Combat Physician the greatest support set, or why isn't Arcanist the greatest healer if the logs show this and that? Well, this is why. So I hope you find it useful, and maybe in the future I'll do more of a deep dive into how to read logs as a healer.